I did mention to you guys, Mehdi Hassan is releasing his show Zeteo, or the platform Zeteo on Substack, frequently showing leftist points of view on current events. Now, I question why is it leftist points of view. I did a different video on his perspective on why it's his mission to call certain things out and where the origin of Zeteo comes from. But here's the first video he ever published on it. Some information about UNWRA came out after this video was filmed by Mehdi, but the truth still stands, and I should be here to clarify things. Let's watch the video, and I'm going to respond to them.
Myth number one, UNWRA is only for Palestinians. What about Jewish refugees? Well, actually, UNWRA was established in 1949 by the UN General Assembly, and Israel was one of the countries that voted in favor of it. In fact, in the wake of what Israel calls its War of Independence and what Palestinians call the Nakba, and for the first 2 full years of its existence, UNWRA also provided relief to Jewish refugees from that conflict up until 1952, when the Israelis decided they would take over that mission. And in 1967, it was the Israelis who occupied the West Bank and Gaza, and then insisted UNWRA stick around to look after the local Palestinian population.
On the first point, it was educational to me. I had no idea Israel formally accepted responsibility for Jewish refugees.
Myth number two, you don't need UNWRA. You could just have the UNHCR, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, which takes care of all the other refugees in the world. It could take care of Palestinian refugees too. Nope, not true. UNWRA was set up in 1949, and its mandate to deal specifically with 1948 refugees from Palestine comes from the UN General Assembly. The UNHCR was set up a year later in 1950, and its mandate comes from the Refugee Convention, which explicitly said it didn't apply to refugees already receiving assistance from other UN agencies. Also, the UNHCR doesn't do direct services the way UNWRA does. Myth number three, UNWRA, unlike other refugee agencies, allows the descendants of Palestinian refugees to claim refugee status too, and thereby inflates and perpetuates the refugee problem. Sorry, what? Under international law, the children of refugees are also refugees. That's not a Palestinian thing, that's an Afghan thing, that's a Somali thing, that's a Tibetan thing. In fact, UNWRA, unlike the UNHCR, says that only fathers, not mothers, can transfer refugee status to their descendants, thereby excluding a significant amount of Palestinians across the world who would otherwise be able to claim refugee status.
As far as myth number two, are you telling me that the UNHCR lacks the support for Palestinian refugees in the General Assembly to expand their mandate and to actually have it take effect to all refugees, including the Palestinian ones? Anything with the word Palestinian will pass the General Assembly and the UN with flying colors. The one thing that protected Israel's interests in security is the United States veto in the Security Council. You want to get an expansion of UNHCR through the General Assembly? That's not a challenge. Mehdi, you and I both know. Bogus. As far as the expansion of refugees being a hereditary thing, in my opinion, speaking as a son of refugees, if the refugees were settled in a different country, integrated and well off beyond the refugee living status, the problem has been solved. Maybe not for the refugees as a whole, but for that person in particular, they shouldn't claim refugee status. Anybody can play the same game, go back far enough into history where the hereditary refugee can just carry on to them, and here you go, everyone's a refugee. What kind of inflation of a definition is that if it doesn't even mean anything anymore? People's refugee statuses should be exclusive to the people living in refugee conditions.
Myth number four, UNWRA textbooks teach anti-Semitic hate to Palestinian kids. Not true. In fact, a Trump State Department report found that 97% of those textbooks contain no anti-Semitic or even anti-Israel bias. 3% is still bad, I know, but it's a tiny minority.
All right, that report from the Trump era, I didn't know about. I have no reason to question the genuineness or the truth of that, but all right, good to know.
Myth number five, UNRWA is in cahoots with Hamas in Gaza. Actually, Hamas doesn't really like UNRWA, never has. Here's a story from 10 years ago about Hamas being peeved at UNRWA because it was too Western, not in line with conservative Islamic values, and a bit of a competitor with Hamas in terms of providing social services to Gaza's population. In fact, Hamas has been accused of threatening and even trying to assassinate UNRWA staff.
Of course UNRWA is in cahoots with Hamas. Look at this picture of the UN headquarters supplying a Hamas intelligence center right under it with power. Look at this report by the Wall Street Journal that the parking lot was sinking and employees didn't want to say anything about it, but they all knew it. Well, let me ask you, a terrorist organization that has some people who disagree with it, maybe some people who really wanted to help the Palestinian people, would you put it beyond them to want to kill them? Again, we're talking about Hamas, a terrorist organization. This myth? That's truth.
Myth number 6, 12 UNRWA employees were involved in the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel. First off, even if there were 12 UNRWA employees who participated in that barbarism, that's 12 out of 13,000 UNRWA employees in Gaza, less than 0.01% of the total, and yet the US agreed to halt vital humanitarian aid for millions of Palestinians via UNRWA because of that alleged 0.01%. Second, we don't even know if 12 employees were involved. Israel has offered no hard evidence. Despite Secretary Blinken claiming Israel's claims on this were highly credible, an internal US intelligence report says it has low confidence that UNRWA staffers were part of the attack and says Israel has not shared the raw intelligence behind its assessments. And last week, UNRWA said in an internal report that some of their employees were tortured by the Israelis into making false claims about UNRWA staffers taking part on October the 7th. But that report from UNRWA hasn't had as much coverage as the initial Israeli claims about UNRWA. You'll be shocked to hear. And finally,
myth number 6, of course UNRWA employees were involved. I give credit to Hillel Neuer of United Nations Watch, based in Geneva. He's been blowing the whistle on this for decades, or a little over a decade, directly to Philippe Lazzarini. Lazzarini has no excuse for saying we were never notified of something like this. But on another point, Mehdi actually blocked him on Twitter. In the spirit of free debate and challenging the status quo, I view it as a negative point on Mehdi as a reporter and a content creator. I don't think Mehdi is seeking the truth and opposing points of view if he goes ahead and blocks Hillel Neuer. Hillel Neuer doesn't post propaganda, lies, or furtherance of any falsities. I am curious to know why that block was instituted. A lot of that data would have been made available to Mehdi had he followed the good work of UN Watch.
Finally, myth number 7. There is no Israeli plan to deliberately destroy UNRWA. That's just a Palestinian conspiracy theory. Oh really? A Palestinian conspiracy theory, you say? Meet Noga Arbel, a former Israeli foreign ministry official. Here she is testifying in front of the Israeli parliament in January.
האתגר שלנו במלחמה הוא לחסל את האיום ולא להרתיע אותו, ואנחנו יודעים איך לחסל פעילי טרור, קשה לנו יותר עם רעיון. אונר"א זה המקור של רעיון, שאמרה עינת, היא יולדת עוד ועוד טרוריסטים בכל מיני שיטות, ואי אפשר יהיה לנצח את המלחמה אם אנחנו לא נשמיד את אונר"א, וההשמדה הזו חייבת להתחיל מיד.
In fact, this week we learned that the Israeli military is bent on dismantling, on eliminating UNRWA. So forget the lies, the myths, the propaganda. This is an Israeli war on UNRWA and by extension on the starving people of Gaza. Why on earth is the United States joining in?
Of course Israel wants to destroy UNRWA. They already knew this. October 7th, the war and the evidence that I just described to you throughout this video and more only gave them the reason to actually put the kibosh on the whole thing. Knowing what you know, would you stand by these 7 myths?